Welcome to the Short Circuit. I'm your host, Darryl Willis, Corporate Vice President of Energy and Resources at Microsoft, and I'm glad to have you join me as we dive into the critical challenges and trends surrounding the energy transition. In each episode, as you know, we'll hear from industry experts and thought leaders who share their insights and perspectives on the current and future state of the energy sector. Transformation starts with people and culture, not technology. So I'm very, very passionate about the intersection between diversity, equity, and inclusion on the energy transition. In addition, the need for a secure and sustainable future is very, very important. And it's also got to be equitable and accessible across all communities and geographies. And with that, I'd like to welcome Sandhya Murali, co-founder and CEO of Solstice. Thank you for participating with us, Sandhya, in Zero Week. And we're happy to have you on the Short Circuit today. Before we get into our discussion about Solstice and what you offer to the community, I'd love for you to spend a few minutes talking about your personal background and why you're passionate about climate technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks so much for having me on this. It's really exciting to be here. In terms of my background and how I kind of found myself in this position and starting Solstice, I had always been very passionate about economic development and social impact. It kind of been a core theme throughout certainly my schooling. And then I started off, my first job was in investment banking, but I knew I didn't want to stay in that forever. And I was getting involved in different philanthropic initiatives that Barclays, the bank I was at, had. And I decided to go back to grad school with this goal of transitioning into the social impact space, for my full-time job. And I'll really credit MIT, where I went to business school, with piquing my interest in sustainability and renewables. I hadn't really thought about climate change early in my career, and especially when I was working in a bank. But learning more about how climate issues intersect so many other areas that I had always been interested, like public health, for example. And realizing that I could work on some really impactful issues focused more domestically made me veer, towards the climate tech space. MIT is also very strong in entrepreneurship, so I will say I caught the startup bug and said, "Yeah, sure. Let me figure out if I can work at a startup, going from a huge corporate bank to a very small organization." And then I got connected to my co-founder, Steph Spears, as I was wrapping up my MBA program, and that was in the very early days when Solstice was just an idea. And what really drew me in is that it was very different from other climate tech companies, where the social mission, this idea of inclusion, equity, and access, was just as important as the environmental mission, and kind of making sure renewables could deploy across the country. And that's what really drew me in when I first spoke to Steph, was not just how can we get solar to go viral, but how can we make sure that everyone has access to it. So that's kind of what brought me here, and the journey that we've been on for the last almost a decade now.
That's fantastic. And as you know, I'm sure better than I know, the climate crisis impacts everyone. And what I'd love for you to do is to share a little bit more about the mission of Solstice. And I'd love for you to talk more about your shared solar platform and how it helps address equity, in particular in clean energy.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of back up and explain how community solar works. So that's fundamentally what we kind of built the organization around. It's a way for people and businesses, so households and businesses, who can't install panels on their rooftop because they live in an apartment, they can't afford it, or otherwise don't have a suitable roof. It's a way for those people and companies to subscribe to a shared solar farm. So think of a community garden, but filled with solar panels. And they then receive savings on their utility bill. So it doesn't cost them anything to sign up. They're just signing up for a subscription. And as the solar farm produces energy every month, they get, based on their allocation, a certain amount of savings on their utility bill every month. So our role, Solstice's role in that ecosystem, is to work with the solar developers, so the companies that are building, raising the capital to install these arrays, work with those solar developers, and we manage the entire customer experience on their behalf. So from initial enrollments to ongoing engagement, and we built out a software platform to manage the participation of these customers throughout their lifetime. Our mission is really to bring clean energy to every community. We started with community solar. Our goal from the beginning has always been to make community solar a more equitable way of switching to clean energy. In the original days of community solar, we were effectively selling, what looked like a rooftop solar product. It had long-term contracts, it had high cancellation fees. You needed a high credit score to be able to participate and sign up. And so from the beginning, we've been pushing on all of those aspects of community solar to try and create more customer-friendly contracts, move away from credit requirements, ensure that meaningful savings are flowing to customers. And it's been really great to see the transformation. Of course, the industry has moved in this direction, but I think we were on the forefront of kind of beating the drum about how community solar needs to work for all households, right? Regardless of where you live and what your income level is. So we spend a lot of time with our developer partners and with their financing partners to really educate about the risks of signing, a more diverse, a broader group of people up. What are the actual risks? And I'm sure we'll get into that, of signing up a broader group of people. What's the trade-off of creating high barriers to entry to sign up, right? And trying to retain these people on these projects for the lifetime of the project, or making it more flexible, knowing that people are going to move, they're going to have to cancel at some point, and just making it easier to then replace those customers, to backfill those customers, which is obviously the tack that we've taken. But yeah, that mission of kind of bringing clean energy to every community and figuring out ways to make a really compelling customer experience, ways to, ensure that energy choices are kind of at the forefront of people's minds and it's not just an afterthought. That's really been central to how we've built the business and really how we operate the company.
I just love the whole notion of a community. I wrote it down actually, a community garden filled with solar panels. That's a very visual thing that you can image.
Yeah.
As a woman co-founder, Sandhya, and a co-founder of a technology startup, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced or things that you've learned along the journey?
Yeah, the startup journey is challenging for sure. My co-founder is also a woman of color, and we're both first-time entrepreneurs. So, trying to go out, raise money, we were trying to make a viable business about getting solar, primarily to low-income households. That didn't really resonate with most investors. So. We did have some very, very supportive early investors who bought into the mission and the vision that we were trying to create. But it was challenging, right? To get that first check in is always the hardest one, and then it kind of builds on each other. But that was tough. I think we were going out with a story that was not so common 10 years ago. And not having a track record of building successful companies, and this is our second, third rodeo, that just added to the challenge. But like I said, we had some really, really supportive early investors, people who got their hands dirty and helped us really think about some of the business challenges we were facing and how to manage a team. That was the other, I think, challenging aspect, is managing an organization, especially as you grow from 4 or 5 people to 10, 15 to 25 to 50, right? And what the people management challenges that come along with that. So we've had some really supportive advisors, investors, like I said, along the way, and that's been so important. And then just building our team, right? Having some people that have been there from the very early days now and are still with the organization and have grown with the organization. First, that's been incredible to see, and to just have people who've really grown their careers here at Solstice. But having their buy-in and kind of their goodwill, for lack of a better word, to really understand that they'll be there throughout the ups and downs, because there's always going to be ups and downs, right? It's tough to build a company. But I think that, that's really where it's a testament to the team that we built, and their ability to kind of handle those challenges, and sort of do it with a really great attitude and a great work ethic. So yeah, I hope I answered your question, but it's there's sort of the
You did.
general challenges of building the business, and I can talk about some of the specific industry challenges too, if that's helpful.
One of the things I love to talk about, Sandhya, is just sort of the role of the cloud and the role of AI technology in particular in what you offer and how AI is going to infuse or infect everything you're doing at Solstice. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would say this is more of a recent development, although we did have our first foray into AI back in 2018. So I think this is going to be key, certainly to scalability of companies and how we can do more with fewer people, which is going to be really important. But we first started using, we used a machine learning algorithm to try to develop a replacement for FICO. So this is our energy score, which we've been working on for many years. And, the need for a FICO credit score to be able to sign up for community solar always seemed archaic to us. So we said, okay, there's this element of payment that customers have to, they have to make monthly payments. Overall, they're saving money on their utility bills, but there is this element of monthly payments. And so why don't we look at other variables like their track record of paying their utility bill to evaluate whether they'd be a good candidate for community solar. So that's how the energy score was born. We received a grant from the Department of Energy. And so we worked with partners at MIT and at Stanford to develop the energy score machine learning algorithm. So it's, basically we had we trained data from over 800,000 utility payment performance rows and over 5,000 demographic variables. And found that the energy score was more accurate and more inclusive than FICO at predicting utility payment defaults. So we were able to increase the number of low-income customers that could participate in projects, again, using this historical training data by about 14%, which is meaningful. So we're now looking at applying the energy score to the rooftop solar space, because like I said, credit requirements in community solar have largely gone away. They still exist in some cases, but for the most part, they've gone away, which is great. But rooftop solar still requires it, and there's a few other energy type purchases that might look at credit qualification where we can use energy score. So that's really exciting. The other kind of newer model that we put together is a churn prediction model. So churn, or when customers leave a community solar project, has a huge impact on our collections rate, our subscriptions rate, both of which are really important to the solar developers, the asset owners, right? Because they want to make sure projects stay fully subscribed and that we're collecting the revenue on the projects each and every month. So if we can better predict when customers are more likely to churn and then run a series of interventions that helps to mitigate or prevent that churn, then we can improve those subscription rates, right? And reduce our churn. So we kind of ran a test at the end of last year on a smaller group of customers and found that we identified kind of a group of high-risk customers that were more likely to churn, ran a series of interventions, our customer success team implemented those, and we were able to reduce churn in that group, that high-risk group, by over 80%. So it's really exciting, and we're going to be kind of continuing to implement that and continue adding our data that we generate every month to this model to really try and bring our churn levels down, or at least be able to predict when it will happen and mitigate it by building up a wait list, backfilling customers in advance, so that we really minimize the amount of vacancy that we have on these projects.
80%. That's a big impact. That's fantastic.
Yeah, which is super exciting, and I think can have a big impact to the viability of these projects.
So then, Sandy, I got one last question. I have one last question for you, and this is really around your vision for Solstice as you look forward into the future. What are you most excited about as you think about the role of your company, what you're going to do around equity and the inclusion agenda as a whole?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that is really exciting right now is the huge windfall that we have in the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's $27 billion in funding going to expand clean energy, and there's a huge focus on low-income communities. So we're having conversations with some of the folks who've won some of that Solar for All funding, and there's so much exciting work that's going to happen over a very short period of time, enabled by this big government bill. And I think that's really exciting, and that's kind of what we're preparing for the road ahead. State governments, city governments, kind of everyone is thinking about how to use this funding to expand access to clean energy, whether it's solar, home electrification. And I think there's a role for us to play in that, in helping to design some of these programs, being connectors in this space, and bringing corporates who have an increasing appetite for renewables, but also want to have deeper community impact and community benefits flowing, through each of their purchases. So sort of bringing all of these groups the kind of money that's available and flowing, and really diverting it to communities that need it the most is a role that we're looking forward to playing, and to participate in some of these programs that are going to be rolling out, in addition to continuing to expand our core kind of community solar, customer management, customer acquisition work. So that's what's on the road ahead. This is all work that I think is going to materialize in the next year or two, which is really exciting. And that's the speed at which we need to operate to really make a dent on climate change.
One of the things I always say to people I get to talk to, Sandhya, is how important speed is. It's so important. And I want to close by thanking you for all that you're doing. And I'm so excited that Microsoft is a part of the journey of Solstice. And for the folks who are listening, this brings us to the end of another episode of the Short Circuit. And I'd like to thank you, Sandhya, for being with us, for sharing what your company is up to, and the impact that you're making. It is truly going to transform communities, and that's really, really exciting to us. And to our audience, what I'd say is to make sure you join us for another episode of the Short Circuit, where we'll continue talking with climate tech startups and underrepresented founders about all they're doing to make a difference in the world. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sandhya.
Thank you so much, Darryl.